Drip, drip, drip. New revelations about high-ranking Bush administration officials and torture. Alberto Gonzales has been named specifically in a new report about interrogations that had happened before the first of the infamous Justice Department memos authorizing torture. Terrorism suspect Abu Zubaydah was captured in March 2002. An FBI interrogator named Ali Soufan was dispatched to question him. Now, Mr. Soufan was an experienced, accomplished interrogator. He, for example, was the person who first obtained confirmation that the 9/11 attacks were the work of al-Qaeda. But Mr. Soufan wrote in the New York Times last month and told Congress last week that even though he was getting actionable, quality information out of Mr. Zubaydah through traditional, non-coercive techniques, the interrogation process was taken over by a contractor working for the CIA. That contractor is now known to be a psychologist named James Mitchell, who had no actual interrogation experience, but who is nevertheless being paid by the CIA to develop a program of violent, force-based interrogation methods.
The contractors had to keep requesting authorization to use harsher and harsher methods. In the case of Abu Zubaydah, that continued for several months.
It's Ali Soufan testifying about those contractors in the Senate last week. The CIA contractor who wanted to use these methods, Soufan said they included forced nudity, sleep deprivation, loud noise, extreme temperatures. The contractor who wanted to use these techniques had to keep requesting authorization to use them. And we know that the contractor got that authorization because those techniques were, in fact, used against Abu Zubaydah. They got that authorization to use nudity and sleep deprivation and loud noises and extreme temperatures. They got that authorization months before the Justice Department ever wrote up the torture memos. So who gave them that authorization? And on what grounds? That is the new revelation. NPR's Ari Shapiro reporting on the basis of a source with knowledge of Zubaydah's interrogation that, quote, nearly every day, contractor James Mitchell would sit at his computer and write a top-secret cable to the CIA's counterterrorism center. Each day, Mitchell would request permission to use enhanced interrogation techniques on Zubaydah. The source says the CIA would then forward the request to the White House, where White House counsel Alberto Gonzales would sign off on the technique. Bombshell. If this is true, if Alberto Gonzales was personally signing off on enhanced interrogation techniques on his own, then the whole idea that there was a legal framework that made these techniques legally okay is sort of a joke. If this is true, when Gonzales was okaying these techniques, he was not Attorney General yet. He wasn't a law enforcement officer at all. He was White House counsel. He was just the president's lawyer. Joining us now is Ari Shapiro, the NPR's justice correspondent who uncovered the scoop. Mr. Shapiro, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
I know you won't tell us who your source is, obviously, but I have to ask if you're confident that he or she is somebody who was actually in a position to know this information.
Yes. You know, every time I talk to somebody who has concerns about their voice, their name being used on the radio, I have a conversation about how much information I can provide to convince listeners of the authenticity of this source. In this case, the most I can say is that this is somebody with knowledge of the Zubaydah interrogation, and unfortunately, that's as far as I can go.
Okay. Well, you have also reported that there's some documentation that might corroborate your source's story. What's the documentation?
This is actually a public document, and I have to say this was sort of a good luck, good timing gift from the journalism gods. I had started to uncover this story, and I called Jamil Jaffer, an attorney with the ACLU who I know has worked on these issues, and he said to me, you know, it's funny you should call because just last night the CIA sent us a log of all of the back-and-forth communication listing the number of times messages were sent from the safe house where Abu Zubaydah was being held to CIA headquarters. And this log showed that there were several communications each day. So that certainly doesn't prove the story, but it's consistent with the story. And as I say, it was pure good luck that I happened to run across this log in Jamil Jaffer's hands the day that I was working on the story.
Yeah, that's sort of dramatic and incredible.
Yeah, the CIA had just sent it to him the night before.
That's amazing. You also, in your story, you quote a former government official, an unnamed government official, saying that if this account is true, then the whole legal and policy review process from April through August would have been a complete charade. What's that former official saying? What's the implication that that official is drawing?
Well, you have to understand that all summer long during 2002, officials from across the government, Defense Department, Justice Department, State Department, White House, were meeting and trying to figure out what the right rules for harsh interrogations were. This is a person who had knowledge of those conversations and said to me, if we had known that the White House was authorizing all of these things while we were on our own trying to figure out what the appropriate rules are, it would have really changed the conversation. And the fact that we didn't know suggests that this entire process that we thought was a good faith, from scratch, across the government effort was, in this person's word, a charade.
Yeah. Well, can the White House counsel actually authorize something for the CIA to do? Does the legal chain of command actually work that way?
It's very unusual. I talked with somebody named Bradford Berenson who served in the White House counsel's office under President Bush but had no role in authorizing these interrogations. And Mr. Berenson said to me, you know, the White House counsel's office is not really in the business of telling CIA interrogators what they can and cannot do. Typically, the White House counsel's office advises people who work in the White House. That said, Mr. Berenson said this was an extraordinary time. It was a very unusual set of circumstances after 9/11. It did not seem entirely inconceivable to him that right after those attacks there would be a concentration of power, and a few months later the Justice Department would author its official legal memorandum.
And we're all left to figure out what it means that the White House counsel's office would think itself capable of authorizing this behavior. I guess I should also note now that you contacted Alberto Gonzales for comment, either to confirm or deny the story. Is it true that he just never responded to you?
That's right, and also James Mitchell, the contractor who conducted these interrogations, has not made any public comment for a few years and couldn't be reached for this story either.
We contacted Alberto Gonzales today, or we tried to. The people who are speaking for him now, I guess, are his talent bookers, and they wouldn't give us any comment either, but they did say they'd pass on our message. So if I hear before you do, I'll give you a call, Ari.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ari Shapiro is NPR's justice correspondent. Thanks for this great reporting. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.